The prison was a beast of concrete and steel, its corridors humming with a primal energy that never slept. Gates clanged, voices barked, and the air carried the weight of despair, defiance, and unspoken deals. In the heart of this jungle, Kane Skinner was a king, a legend, whose name echoed through the cell blocks like a war drum. At 47, his frame was still broad, his eyes sharp with the instincts of a man who'd survived the streets and thrived in the chaos of incarceration. But survival came at a cost, and Kane was paying it now. Locked in a 203-year sentence with a brain tumor gnawing at his skull, Kane had ruled the streets of Eastside long before the bars claimed him. A shot caller in the dope game, he'd built an empire on fear and loyalty, moving weight and settling scores with a cold efficiency. His life was a blur of cash, power, and blood, until it all crashed down a third strike that landed him in this concrete tomb. The judge, Kane joked bitterly, must have thought he was a damn tree to give him such a sentence. Now, the prison was his world, and he navigated its dangers with the same ruthless precision that had made him a kingpin. The cell block was alive with its own rhythm, a pulse Kane called the drums. He heard them in his head, a relentless beat that warned of trouble brewing, and trouble was coming. His son, Ricky, had just been processed into the same facility, slapped with 7.5 years for accessory to murder. The news hit Kane like a shank to the ribs, but what cut deeper was Ricky's rage. In a tense confrontation in the yard, Ricky's words were venom. "You're the reason Mama's dead. You killed her." The accusation hung heavy, a truth Kane couldn't dodge. He dragged their family into his world, and the fallout had claimed Ricky's mother, leaving a wound that festered in her son. Ricky was 19, lean and angry, with his father's fire but none of his control. He'd grown up in the shadow of Kane's absence, raised by a mother who loved him fiercely but couldn't shield him from the streets. Now, he was here, a menace to society, as the courts called him, blind to his own wrongs and burning with resentment. Kane saw himself in Ricky's same hunger, the same defiance, but he also saw a chance to break the cycle, to save his son from the life that had damned him. The prison was a microcosm of the streets, a place where power was currency and loyalty was rare. Redfoot, a wiry hustler with a quick tongue and a knack for deals, moved through the blocks like a fox, brokering alliances and dodging trouble. He'd been locked up with Kane's cousin, a connection that gave him some clout, but his slick talk often outpaced his credibility. Sleepy, a lanky old homie serving a 23-month bid, swore loyalty to Kane, but his promises felt thin, eroded by years of self-interest. T-Bone, a grizzled veteran with scars that told stories, vouched for Redfoot in a tense exchange, but distrust simmered beneath every handshake. The inmates played a dangerous game, and Kane was still a master at it, even as his body betrayed him. The tumor was a tangerine-sized mass, inoperable and merciless. Dr. Sluice Zeltzer, a weary neurosurgeon, delivered the prognosis, 6 months to live. The pain was constant, a fire in Kane's skull that he refused to dull with pills. "The pain makes me feel alive," he growled, rejecting the meds that turned him into a vegetable. He was a god in pain, unyielding, but the clock was ticking. The drums grew louder, and Kane knew he had to act before his time ran out. The warden, Joe, was a towering figure who saw himself as a liberator, a modern-day Frederick Douglass leading inmates to freedom through reform. His programs, Unity 1 and Pipeline, offered education and skills training, a path out of the system's grip. Joe's speeches were fiery, filled with talk of choices. You can be free, or you can be slaves to these walls. Kane scoffed at the idealism, but Joe's persistence gnawed at him. The warden saw potential in Kane, not as a gangster, but as a mentor who could steer kids away from the life he'd led. It was a long shot, but Joe struck a deal. Get Willie, an old saxophonist, his music back, and Kane would work with the programs. Willie's saxophone, silenced by budget cuts, was a small symbol of hope, and Kane saw the leverage in it. The prison's undercurrents were shifting. J.D. Parker, a 22-year-old dope dealer and armed assassin, was making waves. His eyes gleamed with the cold ambition of a predator, and he moved with a swagger that screamed danger. J.D. was a product of the same streets Kane had ruled, but he was a new breed, reckless, untamed, and hungry for power. He'd crossed paths with Ricky on the outside, a beef that ended with J.D.'s crew killing Ricky's friend Mike. Now, J.D. had his sights set on Ricky, a vendetta that promised blood. Kane watched J.D. closely, sensing the storm he'd bring. Then came the bombshell. Brenda, an old flame from Kane's past, visited him in the prison's stark visiting room. Her face was lined with worry, her voice trembling as she spoke. "My son's locked up here, Kane. You gotta look out for him." Kane, hardened by years of loss, nodded grimly, promising to do what he could. But Brenda's next words shattered him. "He's your son, Kane. I was pregnant when I left for Arizona." The boy was J.D. Parker, Kane's blood, a secret kept for over 2 decades. Kane was now caught in an impossible bind protecting 2 sons who didn't know they were brothers, both on a collision course. The prison was a pressure cooker, and the tension was palpable. Redfoot tried to broker peace, arranging a sit-down between Kane and JD's crew. The meeting was a powder keg, with Sleepy and T-Bone flanking Kane, their eyes darting for threats. JD's crew, led by a thug named Troy, bristled with hostility, their hands itching for shanks. The deal was simple. Squash the beef, keep the peace. But JD's smirk told Kane everything there'd be no peace. Redfoot's smooth talk faltered, and the meeting ended with a warning. "You make my spot hot, we got problems." Kane's health was deteriorating. The pain was a beast, clawing at his resolve, but he pushed through, driven by a father's desperation. He confronted Ricky again, this time in a quiet corner of the cell block. "Life's about choices," Kane said, his voice low but firm. "I hope you choose to forgive me." Ricky's eyes burned with anger, but there was a flicker of doubt, a crack in his armor. Kane didn't push, he knew trust was earned, not demanded. The drums were deafening now. JD's crew was moving, their plan to take out Ricky set for the yard. Kane got wind of it through Sleepy, who'd overheard Troy boasting in the chow hall. Kane's mind raced, he couldn't lose either son. But JD's path was a death sentence for everyone. He struck a deal with Joe. Get Ricky into pipeline, keep him out of the yard. In exchange, Kane would mentor a group of young inmates, sharing his story to scare them straight. It was a gamble, but it bought time. Willie's saxophone returned, its mournful notes filling the solitary wing. The old man played with a soul that cut through the prison's coldness, and Kane found himself listening, the music stirring something he hadn't felt in years. He sat with Willie one evening, the saxophonist's fingers dancing over the keys. "You still got it, old man," Kane said, a rare smile breaking through. Willie nodded, his eyes distant. "Music's the only thing keeps me free in here." Kane's past haunted him. In fevered dreams, he saw the faces of men he'd killed: William, Big Phil, ghosts from Southside who'd fallen to his ambition. They whispered of his sins, the families he'd destroyed, the legacy of pain he'd left. He woke in a cold sweat, the tumor's fire raging, but he refused to break. He had to save his sons, even if it meant sacrificing himself. The confrontation came in the rec room, a staged meeting under the guise of business. Kane faced JD alone, the air thick with menace. "You're my son," Kane said, the words raw and heavy. JD froze, his bravado cracking, but his pride wouldn't bend. "You ain't nothing to me," he spat, his hand twitching toward a hidden shank. Kane saw the move, his instincts kicking in. The room erupted, JD's crew surged, but Kane's loyal soldiers, led by T-Bone, were ready. Fists flew, blood spilled, and the guards were too slow to stop it. Kane fought like a man possessed, his strength fueled by desperation. He took down Troy, his fists a blur, but JD slipped through the chaos, his shank aimed at Ricky, who'd been dragged into the fray. Kane roared, tackling JD, the blade grazing his side. The guards finally swarmed, batons swinging, and the riot was quelled. Kane, bloodied and gasping, was hauled to the hole, but he'd bought Ricky time. In the darkness of solitary, Kane's body gave out. The tumor was winning, each breath a battle. Joe visited, his face grim. "You saved him, Kane. Ricky's in pipeline, he's got a shot." Kane nodded, too weak to speak. He'd done what he could, but JD was still out there, a ticking bomb. Ricky visited, escorted by a guard. The anger in his eyes had softened, replaced by something else: grief, maybe, or understanding. "You didn't have to do that," he said, voice low. Kane managed a weak grin. "Yeah, I did. Promise me something, son. Do your time, get out, and help someone else stay out. Break the cycle." Ricky nodded, a silent vow. JD's fate was murkier. The revelation of his blood shook him, but the streets had carved him too deep. He was transferred to another facility, his vendetta paused but not ended. Kane hoped he'd find his own path, but he knew the odds were long. Willie played one last time, a warm, soulful tune that drifted through the cell block. Kane listened, his eyes closed, the pain fading for a moment. He saw his sons, not as they were, but as they could be free, whole, unbroken. It was a fleeting vision, but it was enough. Kane died 3 weeks later, his body finally succumbing. The prison mourned in its own way whispers of his legend. A nod from T-Bone, a quiet prayer from Joe. Ricky kept his promise, working with Pipeline to mentor kids fresh out of juvie, his father's words echoing in his mind. Willie's saxophone became a fixture, a reminder that even in the jungle, beauty could survive. The drums still beat, but for some, they carried a new rhythm: hope, redemption, a chance to rewrite the story. Kane Skinner, the menace, the boss, the father, had left a mark that outlived him, a legacy not of power, but of sacrifice.